Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel, the godfather of all my fellow gingers.
The rapper Lil Kim famously said, "While you struggle and strive, we pick which Benz to drive." Well, you know what? Forget Lil Kim. What about Big Kim? Coach Kim of Gen.G? Because this guy's rolling with trophies and all kinds of swag to boot. No matter what year you're checking in on. The man's a boss with all kinds of gangster. He's really got that gamer subs energy for me, because when he just walks in a room, suddenly things are happening. He's getting done what needs to be done. The important things. He's lasting way longer than you'd expect for people calling him out like, oh, they'll fall off soon enough. And he never does seem to just fall off at the moment they think. In fact, he just pivots, goes to the next thing, comes back the next day stronger and stays winning, doesn't he? So if you want to get an order of delicious gamer subs or anything off their store, remember to add some free samples to try other flavours. Use the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersubs.gg for 10% off anything you might like to order. So Kim Jong-soo, aged 36 years old, is the current coach of Gen.G, but what a resume this guy has. He was the World Championship coach of Invictus Gaming in 2018. He is a 3-time LCK champion and with totally different orgs each time. In 2017, he was a champion with Longju, famously of BDD's Rise. In 2020, he was a champion in Spring with T1 when they upset the Gen.G squad. In 2024, he was the coach of Chovi's Gen.G that won LCK Spring, the most recent split. He obviously, after that, won MSI with Gen.G, so he's won Worlds with the LPL, he's won MSI with LCK. He was a 4-time Worlds qualifier. He qualified 4 times in a row with Samsung in 2016, Longju in 2017, IG in 2018, and Damwon in 2019. All of those accomplishments, winning Worlds, winning LCK, winning MSI, all with different teams, by the way. I mean, now he's obviously won MSI and LCK with Gen.G, but he'd already won LCK before then. So, again, incredible, and representing 2 different regions. And most recently, if you were following this year's storyline of Spring into MSI, into the period coming up to EWC, which doesn't count for this, obviously Gen.G set the record for the longest match win streak ever in Professional League of Legends, beating out T1 from a few years earlier, and then you have to go all the way back like 12, 13 years to the end of 2012, early 2013 for the Team WE/World Elite one of Aaron's World Elite. But I'll just point out some of those results back then were online results in that one. So I actually think this is easily the most legit one ever in history. But despite what an amazing resume, this is one of the most maligned coaches I've ever seen by Western fans on Reddit and in general, just of sort of like the narratives following them around. It is mainly Westerners, I'll note, but I just don't get it. Like, you look at the guy's resume and they really do treat it like he's a fraud or a con man, or he just got lucky, or he was carried and he was a passenger. But then you go and read the interviews and you see what he's doing and his tone and the way he thinks of his teams and who the players he's getting and then what happens to them and then the teams he's getting and what happens to them, and then how even sometimes they evolve a bit beyond when he's just left, but in theory there's still some of his effect potentially being felt, even though now he's no longer in the room. I just don't get it. Now, I get it. Part of it could be the angle that if you're just a fan trying to infer from outside, well, there are a bunch of times where his teams were very successful, but he didn't continue on. So, yeah, Samsung was a game from winning Worlds in Season 6, right? But then he wasn't there with the team the next year. Then you go 2 years later, IG wins Worlds. Suppose he was even told, if you don't win Worlds, you're fired. He won Worlds, so then they didn't renew his contract after that. So, again, as a pleb, you could think, maybe he wasn't in, maybe it was just Ricky and the Shy, and they said get rid of him. Then obviously with T1, he tragically was only able to qualify for Worlds. I actually think that's a big part of why people think he's a fraud. I think they thought, well, he had Faker and that. No, by the way, go look at that team. It's a way worse T1 team that you're thinking of, if you're thinking of the modern era or the Worlds winning era. And he was making that team win LCK and at least in position to qualify for Worlds. But I think that essentially it's T1 fans holding it against this guy from all those 4 years ago now, 3 to 4 years ago, that he didn't do well enough with T1. Even though T1 basically had to do a complete rehaul themselves to get back to a good level. And spoiler, it wouldn't have been good for them if they'd gone to that Worlds anyway. I think his resume is absolutely bonkers. We're going to get into it now, and I'm going to show you some of it. Like, especially, by the way, all the things that make people think he was carried. I take the opposite interpretation. So if you go look how many high-pressure jobs this guy's walking into, high pressure destroys coaches. It destroys players. It would destroy you, random pleb at home. home. You think, give me the best team, the best players, and I would win. No, that would be the hardest gig for you to win from. I'm being serious. You might actually have a better chance of winning with like the second best tier of players who aren't as egotistical, cocky, don't have the same pressure. In fact, actually, if you were on like the third, fourth team, that might give you a better chance to just fluke the win if you were lucky. If you get the biggest gig, T1, IG, like you're supposed to just Gen.G with Chovy, you're supposed to just win now. They're spending millions on these rosters, boys. Then you consider the glow up of the rosters he's had and how many of them just like almost every time just get better from where they start at. And then he's dealing with the biggest, trickiest, most difficult big ego superstar players ever to play League of Legends in these regions. And lastly, even though, interviews or whatever, he comes off fabulously in interviews, in my opinion. If you read translated interviews, he comes off as exactly that figure who I suspect he is, which is not necessarily the crazy X's and O's guy, but the guy with the presence and the guy who holds stars accountable and knows when to actually criticize them and put a fire under their arse, and then when to give them that moment of praise where it's not too much, but it's enough to give them a little bit of satiation, but make them want more and make them want to battle for you and for themselves and their teammates. Like this guy, I think, gives off an amazing vibe. Doesn't surprise me at all. He has this crazy, almost like Magic the Gathering card aura effect of any room he walks into that they just become winners. I'd even say as well, by the way, before we get into some of the other details, here's where I think you even see the sort of Kim effect, where it's the opposite of him being carried. I actually think if you look, so he joined Samsung Galaxy, they used to be like 7th or something when he was there. By the way, when he'd left, they were 1 game from winning the World Championship. They had no business even being at that Worlds, by the way. I think that was the year where it was like KT or something people thought would take the last spot. Then you had when he joined Longju. Now, people forget this. They will inaccurately go, he just joined and then they changed players. No, he joined and in the era when they had the old lineup, and then he helped presumably bring together the new players, and then they went from 7th in spring to like LCK champions and then went to Worlds. And by the way, we're actually favourites to win it, but only made it to the top 8 because they lost to the eventual champions. His old Samsung lineup. Then you had when he joined IG, they'd never won a single LPL title. They were a team that was stuck in 4th place. And so this was a guy where he came in, they went from 4th to the world champions. Then, yeah, sure, you had roster moves along the way, but what, was he not involved in these roster moves? Did he not then use the players that came in? Did players just walk in and win or something? And then I'll just say this as well. Think about some of the teams he was involved with who made it after him. So that Samsung team that he had 1 win from winning Worlds, admittedly, that was when Edgar was there as well, who I think was the head coach. So I'm not quite sure how you mix that up. By the way, funny detail, Edgar later coached the Gen.G that was supposed to win that spring split of 2020 that actually Kim's T1 stole from him. So interesting. But as usual, everyone gives all the credit to Faker and no one else did anything apparently. So Samsung team, they had 1 game from winning Worlds, did win Worlds the following year with almost the same lineup. Dan1, who we coached in 2019, which was their rise year, if you remember, after they'd been the rookies who were at the challenger level the year before and doing all those scrims at Worlds, demoralising Fnatic and G2 players who thought, oh my God, these are just Korean challenger teams murking us. And the Korean challenger teams were Dan1 and Griffin, who went on to be amazing next year. Obviously, Dan1 showed potential this year. The following year, they won Worlds and were the champions of the LCK, and then everyone thought the year after that they'd be even better. But I'll tell you what, once you were over a year removed from this guy, suddenly they weren't as clutch. You know what? When they had that Koma guy, they didn't really win all the Worlds and MSIs that you guys told me they would. But I thought Koma was the god coach. It just shows that it's not as simple as they were just there when they won. They have to infer other things. And lastly, little detail, because it's aged very, very well, is he did come in and coach DRX early on in 2022. He'd left by then, but he brought in his boy Zeke, who used to be with him in BLG over in the LPL. And do you know what? Oh, DRX did already flukily qualify to Worlds later after he'd gone and win Worlds, by the way. So just is interesting how that works. Interesting detail is this guy appears, and he has the rep as a top lane specialist. Think of some of these names he worked with. So he had QV on Samsung Galaxy. Did QV ever look as good as those 2 years? I don't think he did. Like, I think for me, by the way, he was probably the MVP of that win in 2017. It wouldn't actually have been ambition for me. It would have been QV, I think. Or you could give it to Ruler. There's the obvious other one. So I think you look what he did with QV. QV never looked as good before or since. He had someday in Dignitas. This is a detail a lot of people are going to forget about. Is he actually very briefly, let me just show you this quickly. You'll see he has all these Korean teams, and then bizarrely, it's just over in Dignitas for 1 split. And they come 6th. So you're going to see they go 9-9. They're actually tied for 5th before tiebreak, etc. He had 1 coach in spring of season 7 where he coaches Dig. By the way, after that, he goes to Longju, and then he's LCK champion within like four and a bit months. So, but when he was there, here's the interesting detail to notice. Let's go here and look. Dignitas down here. Won as many games as they've lost. This was one of those seasons where they had the best of threes, remember? So you go down, they're technically in sixth place, didn't they? So let's go and look at the All-Pro team, and you'll already see what I mean. All-Pro first, Someday. Someday hadn't been in NA for this long at this point. Remember, it was only a couple of years earlier he was on that KT roster. Like, this was Someday when he really started to get cooking in NA. And who was his coach for this one split? Oh, it was this Kim guy who just so happens to always coach people seemingly to the career best form. And he was a third best top laner on the sixth best ranked team. And by the way, if you want a quick hilarious angle, just look at what he talks about when he was in NA with that team. So they go here. In 2017, you were briefly in Dignitas. Did you not like your time in NA on invenglobal here? He goes, I was in NA for exactly 38 days. First of all, I couldn't do anything in NA. I couldn't even go up on stage for picks and bans. I assume he didn't speak good enough English, I would guess. I'm not sure it says here, though. Second, there was a lot of interference from the business side of the organisation, and they've limited me in what I can and can't do. Also, the players didn't accept feedback very well. I would guess Someday's different because he's Korean. For example, when I talked about a lane that lost, just listen to this. The players would say something like, well, I didn't lose lane. I felt like they were treating the coaching staff like managers. After 4 to 5 games, they told me to go home, so I came back. Laughter. Since I couldn't do anything, I actually think it turned out for the best. Now, the reason why that's absurd, obviously, is because, let me just show you in contrast, when he's in IG, the team he won Worlds with, he goes, it was an environment where everyone freely praised and criticised one another. For example, the Shy would say stuff like, I've won because of you, of how you told me to play. You're pretty good, coach. So basically in Dig, they were like, who the fuck are you? Some manager, bring me water. In fact, you know what? Fuck off. Except maybe Someday who's cool and Korean, so he was willing to listen. And then he goes over to IG, and they're just going like, wow, it's because of you that I'm winning. I'm only the Shy, like probably the greatest top player ever. And now I've gone and won Worlds. Thanks, Coach Kim. It kind of shows you the difference in mentality that people have there, doesn't it? So you had QV in 2016. He had Someday early in 2017 for a little period of time. He had, and by the way, Someday then got to go from there to 100 Thieves and have a bunch of success. Then later on in 2017, they took out Expression as the top laner of Longdew, and they had Khan come in, the notorious Khan, who, yes, was one-dimensional, but he one-dimensionally carried the fuck out of those top lane because he had the Prague Gorilla bot lane. Who do you think set up that team? Or was it Kim by any chance? So he worked with Khan, who went on to become one of the best top laners ever, by the way. Then in 2018, he had the Shy, another Khan-esque talent, where they're really mechanically strong, and they have the carry mindset, but can they work in the team, and don't they have all sorts of problems? By the way, if people don't remember, there's that amazing story too, where he also had Duke, and even though Duke used to himself like 3-4 years earlier be exactly that type of player, the mega carry, he was using Duke as the traditional like tank/bruiser top laner who will play weak side so that the team can carry overall in the squad. Because obviously they had Jackie Love, didn't they? So it allowed them, first of all, to have the Jackie Love angle. And secondly, you could actually legitimately punish the Shy and say, if you aren't going to play within the bounds and the guidelines that I need you to play within, I can bring in Duke and we can still win the game. So he had that whole dynamic, that push-pull he was doing with the Shy in arguably the Shy's best year ever. Let's just go and look at another interview. So if you want to see how key this guy has been to controlling big ego star players and then actually getting them on side, here's a great example from his successful Worlds winning campaign in 2018, working with the Shy on IG. So basically he says, personally, I think the Shy was the deciding factor in the quarter-final match against KT. That was one, if you remember, where it ended up 3-2, but it could have been 3-0 for IG. However, there is a story behind his Fiora in the third game, the one they almost won but didn't. He says, although he did play well, we had another champion in mind for him to play. The pick we had prepared did not infringe on our team comp either. The Shy insisted on playing Fiora and it resulted in a loss. He basically just locked Fiora when they told him not to on stage and just didn't give it a thought, oh, it gives a shit, we're up 2-0. And they punished him. So here you go. After the game, I told him that the team put a lot of resources into Fiora, but the Shy went on to explain that the team comp balance was the same with Fiora and it was easier to play with Fiora than the other planned champion. I then replied that if he doesn't bury his ego, the quarterfinals would probably be the furthest we would go. Of course, I believed that our team deserved to be eliminated in the quarterfinals. This is the reason why I put Duke in the 4th game, which, by the way, they did indeed lose. Since it was impossible for us to have lane priority against KT, I scolded the Shy even more. Afterward, the Shy showed he is willing to work with the team and his ambitions to play on stage again, hence I let him. The Shy then came on stage, they won Game 5, they went to the finals after smashing G2, they won the final semis 3-0, they won the finals 3-0, the Shy played unbelievable in both, but if he didn't do this move here, maybe that never happens. Maybe Shy's ego never gets under control, maybe the Shy keeps disobeying and being petulant in draft, who knows? By the way, who has stories like this with massive superstar players of Korean coaches? It's just not a thing, is it? If Koma has them, we just don't hear those stories in public, do we? And he's worked with sort of almost homegrown talent he's had the whole time. This guy just walks in the door. Who are you, big shot, the Shy, like the super, you like Ronaldinho, your team? Fucking get in practice, dickhead, and stop doing that or I'll bench your ass. Like, this guy's a fucking boss. This guy is just an absolute boss, mate. And then obviously he had Nagori in 2019. Now what you're going to forget again is that Nagori was not the finished product. You're going to think of Nagori 2020 and think, what an amazing player, like MVP candidate, like a sick world champion, LCK champion. No, this is before he'd been champion of anything. This is his rookie year in LCK. And if you forget, he was a player who, along with Canyon and Showmaker, clearly had skills. But the difference was Showmaker looked bona fide from day one and Canyon was really strong. Nagori was the one who used to to win Bwipo style early on and have the 0-2 death power spike or whatever. And part of his problem was he just was a little bit off in when to extend, when to push his lead, when to side lane, when to group team fight always. His shot calling seemed a little bit sus sometimes in terms of where he should be on the map. So what did this guy do? Well, he kept working with Nagori to develop him and make him the player he wanted him to be. But then what he did was he brought in Flame, my favourite player, Flame, who at this point in time had played in FlyQuest and stuff in the past years and over in LCS, Immortals. He brought in Flame, and then the whole point of doing that was that one, then there would be a shot caller from top lane to allow them to experience what that's like, and then he could work to fix the macro with Nagori and the rest of the team, and he could push Nagori, a la what he just did with Shy and Duke, in order to play the way he wanted him to. And what it meant was by the time they got to Worlds, he didn't even bring Flame with him. Now, he said it was because Flame would get depressed if he didn't get to play and he thought it might affect the team. But essentially, Flame had done his job, or rather, Kim had used him to accomplish the ends he wanted to at that point in time. Then he had Kana in 2020. Yeah, the player who now plays in Karmine Corp, probably the best year of his career. He actually was one of the better players on T1 at times. He was a bit one-dimensional again. You all know he only had limitations on which champions he could play and how, but actually, he won a championship with this guy in top lane. In 2022, as I said before, you had Kingen. Who the fuck was Kingen before? Who fuck's Kingen afterwards? Yeah, he wasn't the coach of Kingen at the time. Kingen won later that year in 2022 with DRX, but there's a reason Kingen got to be the fucking finals MVP, guys. He actually did kind of low-key smurf. He was actually very sick, even though Zika would be the player you'd say for the whole tournament. By the way, Zika's one of his boys too, from BLG back in LPL, but we're talking about top lane now, aren't we? And then finally, you're probably going to think, well, that's as far as you can push the whole top lane thing. No. Who's this current top laner? Oh, that's right. Is it Keen on Gen.G? Now, you might think you'd be right. Keen was amazing last year in regular season. Keen's been a very strong top laner beyond the odd 1 or 2 years where he had slumps and was on bad teams for a solid half a decade. I mean, you can go back to 2018 when he was in a Freak of Freaks. And then what happened was he was in dodgy ass teams where he would hard carry 2019, for example, and then the rest of the team was just way too bad. But you get to 2023, Kane's already shown you, in theory, all of his skill set. He's shown you both styles of play from top lane, but famously, he's choking in the playoffs. He's not as good at Worlds, right? You get him in Gen.G, he's not only looked incredible, he got to be the MVP in the finals of LCK, thanks to how Zayas played, but he's also now won MSI, an international tournament. This guy was considered an international choker. Tell you what, he gets fucking Coach Kim, he is now an international champion. This guy just cooks, mate. He just fucking gets it done. He actually did say in an interview, a comment from invenglobal, which implies that he absolutely does have a mind for top lane. He said, during draft, I prefer to invest in the upper lanes and have them carry the game because such games are the easiest to play out. So already, this guy knows a lot about League because in the West, no one would agree with that, would they? In the West, you use the top lane as the weak side most of the time, or the bruiser at best. The idea it's easiest to carry out a top lane is actually almost anathema to how League of Legends is viewed in the West. We play mid to bot most in the eras in history, and more 5v5 team fight as opposed to play out top lane and use side lanes and use map pressure and 1-3-1, etc. Or play on 2 lanes. We just don't play this way. So this guy's already ahead of all of us, by the way. Then consider some of the other teams he was on. In fact, you know what? Let's go look at his career. You'll really see what a bonkers career he's had across the board from beginning to end. So obviously, by the way, as I say in this comment here, check my pinned tweet for exclusive content and predictions on x.com. There'll be all kinds of features there. I also do some live shows, don't I? You start down here. He's working with Samsung. They're becoming a solid enough team. Obviously, they didn't do well there. They got clapped and swept in the playoffs by KT, but they managed to just narrowly beat KT in the regionals. This is the first time he qualified to Worlds. Now, it doesn't list him as being on the Worlds team for finals. I'm not sure if that's because they just list only the head coach, but every interview I saw, no one said anything like he was left at home or bench strength. I don't know why that's listed that way. Maybe they just don't do for other, in this case, would he have been the strategic coach? I don't know. Then you go, he has that splitting dig, but as I say, like, actually, they're not even terrible. You look at the lineup, by the way. Look at who the fuck he's working with there. Like, these are like Keynes at the very end of his time there. LOD was never good. Special's mega washed at this point in time. Chaser used to be good in Korea. He was trash when he was in NA. He used to be really good when he played with Gank by Mom on Jin Air. You have Someday, and he ends up being your one good player. You brought in Stunt, if you remember, to replace Special. You've got Cop still around there, because it used to be Cop and St. Vicious, I think, with the coaches. So he did what he could, though, with Someday. He goes back home. This is the one where you have all these different players. You have the Pragerville bot lane, but you don't have BDD. You have Fly, who's a notoriously just whatever mid laner. You have Crash, who wasn't bad, actually. He was not bad in jungle. And Expression was like a veteran top laner who just never was like a true champion. He was just a skilled player, wasn't he? And at the time, he was working with Song. Then after that, Song just fucks off. I think Song himself went the other direction. Didn't he go to Immortals after this? And for Summer, they're the best team, and then they win. They beat Faker in the final. By the way, it should probably have been KT that was playing against them there. This was obviously the year of the KT super team, right? But bizarrely, SKT just did like the usual like super clutch shit throughout the playoffs, if you remember, until the finals. He won the finals, though, with BDD. At this point, still a young player, Khan, who's brought in. He brought in Cos. Listen, there was years after this where Cos was mocked, and people thought he wasn't that good. I mean, last year in KT, he was supposed to be at the top, and he wasn't even that great. He's actually got better this year, but yeah, kind of tough, right? But you look, these aren't players except the bottom two that would even have pedigree as champions, and they're winning the championship. You go to Worlds, admittedly, Worlds, they bombed it. It was easy in groups when they lost to the eventual champions, his former team, and got swept in the round of 8. I think, personally, that was a jungle diff and a top lane diff at times there. I think Card and Cars really had their problems. Then you go to, he went to IG. Now, you notice he didn't come in spring. So IG and Summer under him. Now you can go, yeah, but the shy rookie. Well, then why didn't they just do that with all the other coaches, mate? They've been around for years at this point in time. And with Duke as well, still a very good player. They had a top team in season 7. Why aren't they just winning LPL and winning Worlds then? Why is this guy's just carried? He walks in the door and they go 18-1 in the split. Monster. Then they lose in the final in the 5th game. Because this is 2018 and the team that wins everything this year until Worlds is RNG. With Uzi I in absolute giga peak form. Ming was a monster. Xiao Hu was really strong. Then you go to Worlds, right? Obviously in the group stage, if you remember, you lost the tiebreaker to Fnatic. So you come second in your group, but you also did beat them in a game in the group. And then in the quarterfinals, you play against KT. That's a 3-2, could have been 3-0. You go to the semifinals, you giga clap G2, 3-0, easy. You go to the final, you giga clap Fnatic, 3-0, easy. You've just won Worlds. You just won Worlds there. So in season 6, his team was a game from winning Worlds when they had no business even being at Worlds, because KT would have qualified. In season 7, he's won LCK, his domestic region, and got to Worlds in the playoffs. In season 8, he's almost won LPL with a team that's never won LPL, and then he wins Worlds. Right? That's only like 3 years in, boys. Oh, and in the meantime, he fucked around in Dig, but just wasn't quite good enough for Dig, was he? Kind of says they're all about the LCS there, boys. Then he goes back and he joins Damwon, this team that was on the rise in 2018. I assume he probably scrimmed them himself when he was at Worlds. And in spring, they can't quite get it together, can they, look? In spring, they're 4th, but they're losing the King Zone. By the way, funnily enough, his former team, if you go back a few years. But they've got the pieces here. So he brings in Flame. And they go all the way to 2nd place overall, but they lose to SKT because SKT just always had that clutch factor in playoffs, didn't they? At the regional, they beat his former team, Kingzone, 3-2, and they get to go to Worlds. At Worlds, they make top 8. Obviously, this is where G2 had that epic performance where they just like cross-mapped 24/7, and they were able to actually beat them. But you lost to the team that went to the finals. Then he got to join T1. T1 was not a good era, by the way. Look, he brings in his boy Cos. I mean, or maybe he's even there already. But he gets Cos in. You got Faker still. You got Teddy, who at this point had to move on from Jin Air. But Teddy's pretty good, but he just doesn't have the best time ever. Effort, I thought, was always a fraud. Was never that good. He has Canna and he has Roach. Roach was never that good. So he's working with some scuffed players. Elim was even there as a jungle sub. So in the first split, they're second overall 14-4, but then they win the final. Gen.G actually just kind of shits the bed on this one. T1 looks way more clutch. Then you had this because sadly there was no MSI, so they never got a chance to go to MSI with this lineup and see what he could have done. So you had to do the mid-season cup against like the LPL teams. LPL and LCK played an online tournament there, which if you remember, Knight and them sort of smurfed on from Top Esports, it would have been at the time. Then you had in summer, the team was pretty good, but that's only good enough for fourth. Unfortunately, in the playoffs, they lost to a Freak of Freaks, which is when they started to fall off really heavily. I mean, look at the fucking lineup. There's a reason this lineup didn't league Joe. And then they made it to the final of the regional, or they're in the final of the regional, but they lost to Gen.G. I mean, this was the year, if you remember, when, I mean, Gen.G wasn't even bad back then. They were still a solid team. This is obviously the one that they played in spring. But you lost to them, unfortunately, in the regional. Now, not making it to Worlds with T1's a big deal, but to be fair, Season 8, they're not making it to Worlds as well. They did almost a complete rehaul. Look at these players. It's 2020. Right, remember, the next year, by the time T1 goes to Worlds, they're already working with a roster of, like, essentially this current roster, but with Canna as the top lane instead of Zeus. Everyone else was there. So after this, he goes to BLG. Now, what's funny is you go look at BLG. He's working with some solid players here, but they're not quite known as that yet. Like, Meteor had actually been a pretty solid player already. Bew was okay. Zika obviously later went on to be a world champion in 2022 and plays now in Hanwha Life. Aiming has since been really good in teams like he's in D+ now, but obviously he was pretty good on KT. He was a stud back then, but he was just quite young. Mark was whatever. I never was a fan of that guy. Played with Jackie Love later. Then later you had the similar lineup, but you had Wei, right? Wei plays for LNG now. Pretty good player, right? You had PP God, who obviously had been on, I mean, it says he's on OMG, but he was on like V5 if people remember. So yeah, pretty interesting set of players all in all. Then you go to DRX the year after that, because it wasn't such a great year in the LPL. You go to DRX, he's working with all those players. Now look, it's not just those though. You got King in. You also had Clay, who, if people don't know now, is in Fear X. Is actually one of the reasons they'd be able to like upset some other teams. You had Pyoreshik, eventual champion, but you also had Peach, who later went on to play in XL/Giant X. You had Zeke and you had Setab. Setab's the guy who later replaced him. You had Deft, but you had Taeyun. People know about Taeyun being on Kwangdong Freaks and practicing with what T1 at Last Worlds or whatever. You had Beryl, but you had Jun. Jun now plays in Fnatic. Had a big glow up around MSI. And as a coaching staff, you had Mowgli, who used to be a jungler for that. You have his boy Song came back. Then you have, he comes now, there's a year off. He comes to this year to play with Gen.G as a coach. Gets the super team, but think about who they are. They haven't won yet. Keen's never won fuck all, never done anything internationally. You have Canyon, who used to be really great, but that's a couple of years back now, and has only worked with Showmaker. You have Chovy, who's a monster, but as he unlocked the shot calling combo, people thought since Peanut's leaving, he's going to be in trouble. Chovy looks fantastic in that sense. Pays, remember, had been a rookie the year before, and I actually think you could argue, had a glow up in some of the games once it got to like the LCK playoffs and MSI. I think he actually had a little glow up and looked way better than you'd expect. He actually seemed like he was going to be coming down this year. Lehens, I think, looks better than he has ever looked. He was good on KT, but I never got why they gave him MVP. I would have even got it if they gave him MVP on this team. Sure, you can't give it to anyone else except Chovy's just too, the eye test shows too much, but this guy clearly has brought something to the team overall, and the way he works with players is very interesting, because I think actually Delight is the better support player. So then you look, he won this split, lost one series. That was really, that wasn't even that great a series, by the way. It was one of those just random ones when you see it. Then you got, it wasn't T1. Then in the playoffs, obviously they won. Even was epic to win in a game 5 against T1. How many people have done that? Then you won MSI. The only team that took you to 5 games, by the way, was Top Esports, who themselves actually had an underwhelming performance. The likes of BLG, you just handled, you took care of. Team 1 couldn't even get to you overall. Then you had the Esports World Cup, where admittedly they lost the opening round to Top Esports. Top Esports actually did look at the time, by the way, like the best LPL team. They were looking better than BLG, and also shown by BLG themselves losing in the opener to T1. So it wasn't even any shame. Top Esports until the final, and even after maybe game 1, were looking fucking amazing. They were the best team in this tournament. So yeah, it sucks to lose, but it's not like it's an official part of the Riot circuit. So to me, I think he's a really interesting guy. Like, not only does he have that, like, BLG 2021 lineup of interesting players that he's working with. Some have never been anyone yet. Some are going to be someone maybe had the odd little bit of potential already. 2020, as I say, he actually resigned. He chose to resign in September because they didn't make Worlds in almost like an Asian honour style, like falling on your own sword, isn't it? It's like just saying, right, that's not good enough. Even though, as far as I know, he was signed through to 2022. I don't know if behind the scenes someone said he will do this. And he was told to do that for honourable reasons, but I actually suspect they would have kept him and he could have just done it. Same way as his mate Edgar actually retired from Gen.G, even though he'd actually been fucking like winning in Gen.G, or at least making the finals and going deep, and he was a world championship coach. Obviously, there was that whole thing as well where he'd also won a split this year. I know a lot of Western coaches, but yeah, I won a split, mate. Like, yeah, let me re-up for another year, give me a different player. I was working with some dodgy ass players. Also, as well as winning spring split, he could, for all we know, have won MSI. We'll never know, though, because he never got a chance to prove it there because there was no MSI in 2020 for obvious reasons. Now, I think this guy is a true head coach. The Korean system is more head coach, who's the disciplinarian, sets the practices, works with people, man management skills, etc. Then you also have the strategic coach who's doing the X's and O's and the pathing and the champions. If you don't have a great head coach, you are in for a lot of trouble, in my opinion. And this guy's worked with so many tricky players. Think of some of the names he talked about. The Shy rookie. He's worked with people like Ambition when he was a jungler later, QV, Crown, who's a very idiosyncratic type of player. Obviously, you think of some of the other squads he was on. You think of like Jackie Love, whatever he did, Ning. These are ridiculous players to work with. Even in T1, you're working with people like, to be fair, he was working with the young Gumayushi, but it's more like you're working with Faker. Obviously, he had Teddy at some point in time. You're working with people who have confidence issues like Kaz, Canna. People would think you should throw them away. He was with Showmaker and Canyon and Nagori. He's with the biggest names in the world. By the way, when he was in Damwon, he was aware the whole time that Nuclear and them had their problems in the bot lane. He understood that. He was always making it quite clear that like, they had to fix things out. They had to fix the macro. They had to fix doing it. If you ever go and read an interview, this guy always nails what the team needs to improve and fix. And often they do fix it under him. Oh, he's fantastic. But people will try and downplay who he is because of the players he was with, which I think misses the point. There's plenty of coaches had those great players and didn't win. Didn't even make finals, didn't make worlds. This guy goes in every room and something good seems to happen, no matter what he is, relative to the expectations of the team. If you go look at some of the smaller teams he's on, they're nobodies. They're not supposed to do anything. And either they do the next year or they do that year with this guy. So let's look at a couple more things in interviews and really get a sense of who this guy is. So here's one already, which is, when he's talking about working with Faker on T1, he goes, the question from Inven goes, given the things that Faker's struggling with right now, did you give him any special homework to work on? He says, we talked a lot, but I can't reveal them in an interview. I can tell you that I scolded him quite a bit, and through it, Faker's found new motivations to work hard. This guy in 2020 is going up to 3-time world champion Faker, many times MSI, LCK, and telling him, MVP, I'm going to have to scold you for the way you're playing. And I'm going to actually hopefully set a fire under you to get a new motivation, mate. It's like, this guy's no punk. He knows what he's fucking doing. Then if you go and look at some of this shit, as a coach, if you had to choose a player that you've struggled to lead the most, who would it be? He goes, it would definitely be Nagori. He's really stubborn, so it was hard to communicate with him, even if there was something wrong. If he thought it was right, familiar with the Shy, right? Then no amount of words ever got through to him. He's coaching this guy after he's just coached the Shy to win Worlds, by the way. The issue's gotten a lot better, and he now listens more. Speaking from experience, top laners were always hard to deal with. Laughter. Their in-game principles are very clear and are obsessive about their lane. I think QV was also like that, so you also had to work with QV's difficulties. For example, it's impossible to just be taking tower plates for the first 40 minutes of the game, but top laners have to take all of them to feel satisfied. Also, when you look at them after winning a match, if they lost lane, they'd look depressed. It was kind of odd. I couldn't believe my eyes at first. But if people start playing top lane, it changes them. I think it's because top laners are put on an island and they have to play the game out on their own. Then here's an interesting answer. It goes, on the flip side, is there a player that you think you could learn from? Because, by the way, great managers and coaches in sports and esports also take things from great players they play with or different ways of seeing the game and are able to apply that later. He says there are exactly 2 players, and that's Prey, the AD carry, who was an amazing weak side AD carry and shot caller, and Rookie, obviously, I think the actual best player of all time time in league. I felt that I could actually learn a lot from Prey, and I was just amazed by Rookie. Players usually don't like to admit their own mistakes because of their pride in their abilities. However, Prey is the type of player that goes, I've made mistakes here and there and I've screwed up, I'm sorry, and tries to look at the situation as a whole. That's not an easy thing to do. He's always the one to practice the latest, and as in at night, and tries to lead the younger players. Prey also acts like a coach, so he's a born leader. Rookie was similar to Prey. He's a leader. He also tried his very best to survive in China. He studied the language extensively and even tried to adjust to the local food. He did whatever was needed to adapt to the LPL. He was also close to perfect in-game. Whenever players were told to go on vacation, Prey and Rookie would always just watch replays and play solo queue. Who wouldn't love players like them? For example, last year, Chinese players would practice until 1 to 2 a.m, but Rookie would always stay up to 5 a.m. practicing. He's always giving it his best, and I've told him, you're going to be the best until the day before you retire. Not a bad statement, by the way, because if you don't know, there was times in spring this year when Rookie looked really good. Admittedly, not the absolute best, but that was in 2018. He was working with Rookie like 6 years earlier. Very telling answer about Showmaker, if you want to know about his dad one time. It was noteworthy to see you mentioning Showmaker in many of your interviews. I'll link all these interviews in the description, by the way. I'm always grateful to Showmaker. I even feel bad to the other players that I only talk about Showmaker. I've praised him so much that people may even think I favour him over other players. The praise is well deserved because he really is the perfect player. Good personality, mindset, skill, provides good feedback. Notice how this guy doesn't take it as you're just good in the game. He wants you to have good personality, to have a good mindset. Your skill has to be good. You have to provide good feedback so he can work with you. This guy's so obviously a fucking good coach. And then he put here, think how telling this is, and like what I've shown you earlier with Deshae and with Faker. I don't think I've ever scolded him since I came to Dan 1, and I don't think I'll need to in the future. Right? He's just said Naguri was one of the hardest players to work with. He never had to scold Showmaker. The implication is he'll scold anyone who needs it if he thinks they need it. This guy's a fucking boss. This guy is just a boss. And then lastly, I'll go and show you this one here where they did an interview with him and Maffa. Obviously, Maffa used to be the support player of Score back on KT Ralston, the bot lane back in there, but he was a coach of IG before Kim got there. Now, here's what's very interesting if you look at this, is if you go and look, it's asking about the different styles because these two coaches are working together, and so they're getting to like say what their weaknesses are because they get to know the other guy covers it, right? But in doing so, you'll see what this guy brought that Maffa didn't and why they wouldn't have won without Kim. So it goes here, we genuinely want to hear each other's perspectives. The two of you must have vastly different coaching styles. Maffa goes, are you ready? Because I'm so timid, I can't scold. That word again, or punish the players that well. However, if I go over my limit, I sometimes pour out my frustration. You are supposed to keep some distance between players in order to properly coach them. Because I bonded very closely with the players, a mistake in my opinion, it gets hard for me to coach them effectively. That is why when I do get angry, the players don't take it well. Contrast that. So Maffa was there, but a pussycat friend to the players. He's working with, he doesn't want to scold them or tell them off or be forceful. And if he does, he goes too far and they don't listen. Here's what Kim brought instead. Absorbing all the information about the LPL, I began to give strict feedback to the team. I went from what items they should build to how they should play. This guy doesn't give a fuck. And above all, I focused on promised play. If they do not do this, I punish them without restraint. It wouldn't matter if the player gave a valid reason. However, if the player does whatever they please, it will be a detriment to the overall team play in the long run. If we lose, despite playing how the coaching staff want us to play, it is my responsibility. If this is the case, I am more than willing to protect the players and take the blame. However, if a player purposely ruins the team's ability to win, that is the end between me and the player. And I'm fine with losing. I remember I said to a player that he had no reason to be on the team because of this very reason. And then it goes on to the story about the shy. This guy is just for real. Like, you look at the other people, the other orgs, when he's there with them, they are more of the pussycat. They are more of the chill guy, the nice guy, the guy that get the players think, oh, he's awesome. By the way, there's another reason you'll get a negative a reputation following around. The players that win with you will go, you're great, I won with you. When you're harsh on players and strict and you hold them to a standard and you don't win, they'll just trash talk you in the community to other players. They'll say, oh, he's the reason why, he was a dickhead, oh, he was doing all this, that, and the other. So I don't get it. The idea of this guy's like a fraud. How could he be? Seriously, how could he be? Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadjou, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Tooorin, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel. Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.